Think you know everything about Discovery Channel's wilderness reality series? Think again. Behind the cameras capturing McCarthy's rugged frontier life lurked dark secrets. A decades-old mass murder that haunted the town, fabricated backstories, bizarre family feuds involving mooning incidents, and one of the world's largest man-made ruins that producers used as a filming location. These shocking revelations prove that life in Alaska's most remote town was far stranger than any scripted drama could imagine. Fact 1. Town built on mass murder. The remote Alaskan town of McCarthy, which served as the backdrop for Discovery Channel's Edge of Alaska. On March 1, 1983, what should have been an ordinary mail day turned into an unthinkable nightmare that would forever change this tiny frontier community. Louis Hastings, a 39-year-old unemployed computer programmer from Anchorage, had been living quietly in the nearby town of Kennecott, just 4 miles from McCarthy. On that frigid winter morning, as the town's 22 residents gathered at the small airstrip to meet their weekly mail, plan their only connection to the outside world during the harsh winter months, Hastings began systematically hunting them down with a small-caliber rifle. The massacre unfolded with terrifying precision as Hastings moved through the community, shooting residents one by one. He succeeded in killing 6 people and wounding 2 others before his rampage ended. One survivor, Christopher Richards, later told authorities about the chilling words Hastings spoke during the attack. "Look, you're already dead. If you'll just quit fighting, I'll make it easy for you." Richards managed to escape by slashing Hastings with a knife and fleeing barefoot through the snow to get help. What made this tragedy even more disturbing was the motive behind the killings. Investigators later discovered that the murders were part of Hastings' elaborate and deranged plan to destroy the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. His twisted logic was that killing all the McCarthy residents would eliminate potential witnesses to his planned attack on the pipeline, which he believed would restore Alaska to its pre-oil boom state. Hastings had spent months preparing for this moment, accumulating several firearms and over 2,000 rounds of ammunition, even manufacturing a silencer for one of his weapons. The sole resident who avoided being shot that day was Gary Green, a local pilot who would later become one of the main cast members of Edge of Alaska. Fact 2. Gary Green's horrific cleanup. Gary Green, who would later become one of the most recognizable faces on Edge of Alaska as McCarthy's local bush pilot, carries with him one of the most traumatic experiences imaginable from that terrible day in 1983. While the massacre claimed 6 lives and wounded 2 others, Green found himself in the unthinkable position of being the sole McCarthy resident who escaped being shot during Louis Hastings' deadly rampage. What happened after the shooting stopped was almost as haunting as the violence itself. When Alaska State Troopers finally arrived at the remote location and the investigation began, someone had to deal with the grisly aftermath left behind at the crime scenes. That responsibility fell to Green, who faced the horrific task of cleaning up the blood that had been spilled throughout his small community during those terrifying hours. Years later, when Discovery Channel cameras arrived to film Edge of Alaska, Green spoke candidly about his experience that day, though the weight of those memories was still clearly visible. In his own words, Green explained the terrible reality of what he had to endure. "I'm the only one in town that day that didn't get shot. I cleaned up all the blood." The fact that Green remained in McCarthy after such a traumatic experience speaks to the deep connection many residents feel to this isolated place, despite its dark history. His decision to stay and eventually participate in a television show that would bring national attention to the town demonstrates the complex relationship many McCarthy locals have with their community's past. Green's presence on Edge of Alaska added an unspoken layer of authenticity to the show, as viewers were watching someone who had lived through the town's darkest chapter and chosen to remain, becoming an integral part of McCarthy's small but resilient community in the decades that followed. Fact 3. Jenny's completely fabricated background. Jenny Rosenbaum emerged as one of Edge of Alaska's most compelling cast members, portrayed by Discovery Channel as a tough, independent woman who had carved out a solitary life in the Alaskan wilderness. after moving to McCarthy straight out of high school. The network painted her as the ultimate rugged loner, someone who had turned her back on conventional society to embrace the harsh realities of frontier living with nothing but her high school diploma and fierce determination. However, this carefully crafted image was almost entirely fictional, created by producers who decided that Jenny's real background didn't fit the narrative they wanted to tell. The truth about Jenny's life before McCarthy was far more conventional and educated than Discovery Channel wanted viewers to believe. Rather than heading to Alaska immediately after graduating high school, Jenny actually spent several years attending the University of Texas at Austin, pursuing higher education in a completely different environment from the wilderness setting that would later define her television persona. The fabrication extended beyond just her educational background to include significant aspects of her personal life that the show completely ignored or misrepresented. While Discovery Channel's official biography presented Jenny as a solitary figure who had chosen isolation over human connection, her real life told a very different story. Her social media presence revealed that she had been married at some point and was actually in a committed relationship with a man named Caleb, directly contradicting the loner image that producers had created for television audiences. Perhaps most significantly, the show failed to mention that Jenny was a mother to a son named Jasper, a major part of her life that was completely erased from her television storyline. This omission transformed a complex woman with family responsibilities and educational achievements into a one-dimensional character designed to fit Discovery Channel's preferred narrative about rugged individualism in the Alaskan frontier. Fact 4. Neil Darish pitched the show. While many reality television shows are born from production companies scouting locations and approaching potential subjects, Edge of Alaska came about through a much more direct route that has created lasting resentment among McCarthy's residents. The show's existence can be traced back to one man's entrepreneurial vision and his willingness to open his remote community to the scrutiny of national television cameras. Neil Darish, the businessman who became one of the show's central figures and often its most controversial character, was actually the driving force behind bringing Discovery Channel to McCarthy in the first place. Rather than being discovered by television producers, Darish actively sought out the opportunity to showcase his town and his own development projects to a national audience. He personally reached out to Discovery Channel, inviting them to visit the remote location and presenting them with his concept for what would eventually become Edge of Alaska. This fact is not a secret among McCarthy's tight-knit community, where most residents are well aware that Darish was the one who initiated contact with the television network and pitched the idea of filming a reality series in their town. Many of the locals who appeared on the show, particularly those who opposed Darish's modernization efforts, point directly to him as the person responsible for thrusting their previously quiet community into the national spotlight. Darish himself has been relatively open about his role in creating the show, expressing his belief that the television exposure would ultimately benefit McCarthy by attracting tourists and investment to the area. In early interviews, he defended his decision by stating that there was no evidence of reality television shows actually destroying small towns, though this perspective was not shared by many of his neighbors who valued McCarthy's isolation and preferred to remain largely unknown to the outside world. Fact 5. Scene-scripted reality drama. Edge of Alaska may have presented itself as an authentic glimpse into life in remote Alaska, but Neil Darish pulled back the curtain on the show's production methods during interviews, revealing that what viewers saw was far more orchestrated than most reality television fans might expect. Rather than simply following the natural drama of frontier life, the show operated under what Darish described as a scene-scripted format that blurred the lines between documentary and manufactured entertainment. This behind-the-scenes approach meant that Discovery Channel producers would arrive in McCarthy with predetermined storylines already mapped out, deciding in advance what conflicts or events they wanted to capture during each filming period. The production team would select specific locations where scenes should take place, identify which cast members needed to be involved, and outline exactly what dramatic situations should unfold during filming. This level of pre-planning allowed the show to guarantee that each episode would contain the kind of interpersonal conflict and high-stakes drama that keeps viewers engaged. However, Darish explained that the scripting process typically stopped short of providing cast members with actual lines to memorize and recite. Instead, the producers would set up situations and conflicts, then allow the participants to react and speak naturally within those manufactured circumstances. This approach created a hybrid form of reality television, where the emotions and reactions were genuine, even though the scenarios that triggered those responses were artificially constructed by the production team. Darish was surprisingly candid about this process, describing it as theater rather than documentary filmmaking, though he emphasized that this didn't make the show dishonest or wrong. He acknowledged that the dramatic storylines were specifically designed to appeal to viewers who were drawn to conflict and excitement, rather than being created for Alaskans who might prefer a more straightforward portrayal of their daily lives. Fact 6. Jason's fiery near-death escape. Jason Lobo, the skilled bush pilot, who became a fan favorite on Edge of Alaska for his rugged homesteading lifestyle and aviation expertise, faced a terrifying life-or-death situation just months after the show ended its 4-year run. On the night of October 23, 2017, what began as a peaceful sleep in his remote McCarthy cabin turned into a nightmare that would cost him nearly everything he had worked to build over the years. Just before midnight, Jason was jolted awake by the unmistakable smell of smoke filling his bedroom, a scent that immediately told him something was seriously wrong. When he opened his bedroom door to investigate, he discovered that his worst fears were reality as he found himself staring directly into what fellow cast member Mark Wacht later described as a massive ball of flames that had engulfed his entire living room area. The fire had spread so quickly and intensely that Jason's only option for survival was to run directly through the wall of flames that blocked his path to the cabin's exit. The desperate escape attempt saved Jason's life, but it came at a devastating personal cost that extended far beyond the physical injuries he sustained. While he managed to get out of the burning structure, he suffered severe burns across his body that required immediate hospitalization in Anchorage, where he spent weeks recovering from his injuries. Even more heartbreaking was the loss of his beloved dog Achilles, who perished in the flames, along with all of Jason's personal possessions and the homestead he had spent years building from scratch. The tragedy sparked an immediate response from the tight-knit McCarthy community and Edge of Alaska fans, with fellow cast member Jenny Rosenbaum organizing a GoFundMe campaign to help Jason rebuild his life. The fundraising effort aimed to provide him with the tools, hardware, and lumber needed to construct a new cabin before Alaska's harsh winter arrived. Fact 7. World's largest man-made ruin. Tucked away in the wilderness surrounding McCarthy lies what many experts consider to be the largest man-made ruin anywhere on Earth, a massive industrial complex that served as both a stunning backdrop for Edge of Alaska and a central point of controversy throughout the show's run. The Kennecott copper mining operation, which sits just 5 miles from McCarthy itself, represents one of the most ambitious and ultimately abandoned industrial projects in human history. The centerpiece of this colossal ruin is the 14-story concentration mill, a towering structure that once processed millions of tons of copper ore during the early decades of the 20th century. This enormous building, along with the surrounding network of mining facilities, worker housing, and industrial equipment, created what was essentially a complete city dedicated to extracting copper from the remote Alaskan wilderness. When the high-grade ore deposits were finally exhausted in 1938, the entire operation was simply abandoned, leaving behind this incredible monument to industrial ambition. Neil Darish, ever the entrepreneur, saw tremendous potential in opening this historic site to paying tourists, believing that guided tours through the ruins could provide both educational value and significant revenue for the struggling local economy. His vision involved restoring parts of the complex to make it safe for visitors, while preserving its authentic industrial atmosphere. allowing people to walk through the same buildings where thousands of workers once labored in one of the world's most remote mining operations. However, Darish's tourism plans faced significant opposition from residents like Jeremy Keller, who worried that increased visitor traffic would destroy McCarthy's peaceful, isolated character. The conflict over whether to commercialize the Kennecott ruins became one of the show's most persistent storylines, representing the broader tension between preserving the area's frontier heritage and embracing modern economic opportunities that could sustain the community's future. Fact 8. Tim's stubborn heart attack survival. Tim Michel, affectionately known throughout McCarthy as the Old Man of the Mountain, became living proof that sheer willpower and stubbornness can sometimes triumph over medical expectations when he faced a life-threatening health crisis in October of 2015. After spending more than 40 years calling McCarthy home, Tim suffered a serious heart attack that medical professionals believed would likely be fatal, especially given his remote location and his surprising decision about treatment. When doctors evaluated Tim's condition and recommended surgery as his best chance for survival, the longtime McCarthy resident made a choice that shocked both medical staff and his fellow townspeople by flatly refusing to undergo the recommended surgical procedure. This decision seemed particularly risky considering that Tim was living in one of the most isolated communities in North America, where the nearest hospital was over 100 miles away, and emergency medical care was extremely limited during the harsh winter months. Given Tim's age, the severity of his heart attack, and his refusal to follow medical advice, virtually everyone who knew him expected that his time in McCarthy had come to an end. The tight-knit community prepared for the loss of one of their most respected and experienced residents, someone who had witnessed decades of changes in their remote town and served as an unofficial advisor to younger residents who valued his wisdom and knowledge about surviving in the Alaskan wilderness. However, Tim's legendary toughness and determination proved stronger than anyone anticipated, including the medical professionals who had treated him. After a long and difficult year of recovery, during which many people assumed he would never return to his mountain home, Tim surprised everyone by making his way back to McCarthy, appearing as healthy and spirited as ever, and ready to resume his role as the community's elder statesman and unofficial mountain sage. Fact 9. Pilgrim family camping chaos. In 2016, McCarthy found itself at the center of one of the most bizarre and contentious disputes in the town's recent history, when the Pilgrim family, a large religious clan of 17 members, set up an extended camping operation right in the heart of the community that quickly spiraled into an extraordinary conflict involving multiple criminal charges and escalating threats from frustrated neighbors. The drama began when the Pilgrims, who had been battling the National Park Service over bulldozer access to their remote land 13 miles inside Rangel St. Elias National Park, decided to relocate their entire household to McCarthy's town center, while their legal disputes continued. The family established what could only be described as a makeshift homestead, complete with multiple tents, vehicles, and farm animals scattered across public areas, creating a situation that the town's small population found increasingly difficult to tolerate. The tensions quickly escalated beyond simple neighborly complaints as the summer progressed, with the conflict eventually resulting in 2 separate assault charges being filed against area residents who had grown frustrated with the Pilgrim family's extended presence. Adding to the surreal nature of the dispute, there was also a reported incident involving someone from the family allegedly mooning other residents. Though when Alaska State Troopers made the long journey to investigate, they determined that the incident didn't amount to indecent exposure, since the individuals involved had been wearing swimming suits. As the situation continued to deteriorate, local landowners became so exasperated that they began threatening to use bulldozers to physically remove the Pilgrim family's tents and belongings from the public areas they had occupied. The community eventually organized a formal petition demanding that the family relocate, which stated bluntly that their continued homesteading of that public area with farm animals, vehicles, and your large family is clearly not in the best interest of the community. Fact 10. Papa Pilgrim's dark secret. The charismatic patriarch of the Pilgrim family, who went by the name Papa Pilgrim but was legally known as Robert Hale, presented himself to McCarthy residents and the outside world as a devout religious leader guiding his large family in righteous wilderness living. But this carefully constructed image concealed a horrifying reality of systematic abuse that would eventually destroy the family's public reputation and land him in prison. For years, Papa Pilgrim successfully maintained his facade as a godly man who had led his wife and 15 children to Alaska in search of religious freedom and a simpler way of life, winning support from many McCarthy locals who admired what appeared to be his family's commitment to traditional values and self-sufficiency. His long beard, biblical language, and the family's impressive survival skills in the harsh Alaskan environment helped convince neighbors and media observers that they were witnessing an authentic example of faith-based homesteading. However, in 2005, the truth about Papa Pilgrim's behavior began to emerge when several of his oldest children courageously came forward to Alaska State Troopers with devastating allegations about what had been happening within their isolated family compound. The children revealed that their father had been physically and sexually abusing family members for years, using his religious authority and their remote location to maintain control over his victims and prevent them from seeking help. The criminal investigation that followed these revelations led to Papa Pilgrim's arrest and prosecution on multiple charges of rape and abuse. In 2007, after facing overwhelming evidence of his crimes, Robert Hale pleaded no contest to the charges against him and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. His reign of terror finally came to an end in May of 2008 when he died in jail, still refusing to acknowledge the suffering he had inflicted on his own family members. Fact 11. Jeremy's political Senate run. Jeremy Keller, the homesteader who became one of Edge of Alaska's most recognizable cast members for his fierce opposition to modernizing McCarthy, surprised many fans when he decided to take his anti-establishment views from the Alaskan wilderness directly into the political arena by running for the United States Senate in 2022 as a nonpartisan candidate. Keller's campaign platform reflected many of the same concerns about government overreach that viewers had seen him express throughout the television series, but his official positions took these beliefs to much more extreme levels than most people might have expected from someone who had simply appeared to prefer traditional frontier living. According to a candidate questionnaire published by the Anchorage Daily News in August of 2022, Keller listed his occupation as a carpenter and confirmed that he was still residing in McCarthy while serving as president of the McCarthy Area Council. The policy positions that Keller promoted during his Senate campaign included several highly controversial stances that put him at odds with mainstream political thinking on major national issues. He publicly referred to COVID-19 as a fraud and called the vaccine the jab, while also accusing the federal government of deliberately orchestrating both the pandemic and the economic disruption that followed. His platform also included rejecting all federal funding as harmful to state autonomy and completely denying the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election results. Perhaps most notably, Keller dismissed the January 6th Capitol events as a patently absurd description of what had actually occurred, while simultaneously advocating for arming and training all American citizens as part of his broader political philosophy. He also expressed strong opposition to immigration reform efforts and voiced skepticism toward climate change mitigation policies, positions that aligned with his long-standing belief that government intervention in people's lives should be minimized whenever possible. Fact 12. No law enforcement buffer zone. McCarthy operates in what could be described as a complete legal and medical vacuum, with the remote town having absolutely no law enforcement presence, no hospital facilities, and no emergency services of any kind, creating a situation where residents must handle everything from medical emergencies to criminal incidents entirely on their own, until help can arrive from over 100 miles away. This isolation means that when serious problems arise in McCarthy, whether they involve medical emergencies, accidents, or conflicts between residents, the community has no immediate recourse to professional assistance that most Americans take for granted. The nearest Alaska State Trooper post is located in Glen Allen, requiring a difficult journey across treacherous mountain roads that can take hours under the best conditions and may be completely impassable during severe weather or winter months when the route becomes an icy, dangerous passage. The same geographic isolation applies to medical care, with the closest hospital facilities located in the same distant town of Glen Allen, meaning that anyone suffering a heart attack, serious injury, or other medical crisis faces potentially life-threatening delays before receiving professional treatment. This reality has created a community where residents must be prepared to handle everything from basic medical procedures to complex emergency situations using only their own skills and whatever supplies they happen to have on hand. Some longtime McCarthy residents, particularly those who value the town's isolation and self-reliant culture, have expressed concern that Discovery Channel deliberately emphasized and exploited this lawless aspect of their community for dramatic effect throughout Edge of Alaska's run. Local resident Stevens Harper specifically worried that the network's promotion of McCarthy as a place without rules or oversight could actually attract dangerous individuals who might view the town's lack of law enforcement as an opportunity rather than simply a consequence of its remote location and small population size. Fact 13. Jeremy's steel rod leg. Jeremy Keller, the rugged homesteader who became known throughout Edge of Alaska for his physical toughness and ability to handle the demanding challenges of frontier life, carries within his body a permanent reminder of how quickly even the most experienced wilderness residents can face serious injury from seemingly simple everyday activities in the remote Alaskan environment. In September of 2004, shortly after the birth of his first son Bjorn, Jeremy experienced what would become one of the most significant physical setbacks of his adult life when he slipped while crossing a wet footbridge near his McCarthy homestead. What might have been a minor stumble in a more forgiving environment became a major medical emergency due to the unforgiving nature of the terrain and the serious impact that resulted from his fall onto the hard ground below. The accident caused such severe damage to Jeremy's leg that local medical assessment quickly determined he would need immediate surgical intervention to have any hope of proper healing and continued mobility. The fracture was so extensive and complicated that doctors concluded the only way to repair the damage and provide long-term stability would be through the insertion of a substantial steel rod that would extend from his knee joint all the way down to his ankle, essentially creating an internal framework to support the damaged bone structure. This major surgery and the lengthy recovery period that followed came at a particularly challenging time for Jeremy and his wife Allison, who were adjusting to life as new parents while maintaining their demanding off-grid lifestyle in one of Alaska's most isolated communities. Despite the severity of the injury and the permanent hardware now embedded in his leg, Jeremy eventually returned to his physically demanding way of life, though the steel rod remains a constant part of his anatomy and a testament to both the dangers and the resilience required for frontier living. Fact 14. The show nearly bankrupted Jeremy. Jeremy Keller's passion for dog mushing and his dream of competing in Alaska's most famous race led to a financial disaster that forced him to abandon his athletic ambitions for over a decade, revealing how even the most dedicated wilderness enthusiasts can be overwhelmed by the enormous costs associated with pursuing their goals in such an expensive and demanding sport. In 2007, Jeremy finally achieved his long-held dream of competing in the legendary Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race, the grueling 1,100-mile journey across Alaska that represents the ultimate test of endurance for both mushers and their dog teams. However, what should have been the fulfillment of years of preparation and training instead became a harsh lesson in the brutal economics of competitive dog mushing, where the costs of maintaining a competitive kennel, purchasing proper equipment, and covering race expenses can quickly spiral beyond what most people can afford. Jeremy was brutally honest about the financial impact of his Iditarod participation when he later reflected on the experience, admitting that running that race nearly bankrupted us and describing the financial strain as a moment of clarity that forced him to completely reevaluate his priorities and lifestyle choices. The enormous expense associated with his first Iditarod attempt put such a severe strain on his family's finances that Jeremy had no choice but to set aside his mushing dreams entirely, focusing instead on the more practical concerns of supporting his wife Allison and their growing family. This financial setback meant that Jeremy spent the better part of 2 decades living in McCarthy without being able to pursue the sport that had been such an important part of his identity and future plans. It wasn't until around 2017, when the family relocated from McCarthy to Nick and Edge of Alaska ended its run, that Jeremy finally found himself in a position to return to competitive dog mushing and begin working toward another Iditarod attempt. Fact 15. Jenny's secret cannabis business. Jenny Rosenbaum, who had been portrayed throughout Edge of Alaska as a simple homesteader, focused on traditional frontier activities like gold panning and birch syrup tapping, surprised many fans after the show ended by embarking on a completely different kind of entrepreneurial venture that required navigating complex state regulations and licensing procedures that were far removed from her television image. Following the conclusion of Edge of Alaska in 2017, Jenny began the lengthy and complicated process of obtaining the necessary permits and licenses to open what would become McCarthy's first retail cannabis shop, a business venture that represented a dramatic departure from the rustic, old-fashioned lifestyle that Discovery Channel had emphasized throughout her appearances on the show. This transition from traditional homesteading activities to modern cannabis retail required her to work through Alaska's rigorous regulatory framework, which involves extensive paperwork, background checks, and compliance with numerous state and local requirements. The licensing process for cannabis retail operations in Alaska is notoriously complex and time-consuming, requiring applicants to demonstrate their understanding of everything from inventory tracking systems to security protocols, tax obligations, and zoning compliance issues. Jenny's willingness to tackle this bureaucratic challenge showed a business-minded side of her personality that had never been explored during her time on Edge of Alaska, where producers had focused almost exclusively on her outdoor survival skills and self-sufficient lifestyle. Jenny herself discussed this new chapter of her life during interviews with local media, explaining how she had worked through the demanding application process and describing her excitement about bringing this type of business to McCarthy for the first time. Her cannabis shop venture represented not just a personal career change, but also a sign of how even Alaska's most remote communities were adapting to changing laws and finding new economic opportunities in industries that would have been unimaginable during the show's original run.